The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today is Thursday, June 8th. I'm Robert White, Operations Director for Maryland Department of Health's Developmental Disabilities Administration, and I am joined here today by the Hilltop team. We want to welcome you to today's General Ledger Collection Training. Today's training will focus on residential services. Before I turn it over to the Hilltop team, I just want to go over a few things about the webinar. First and foremost, this session is being recorded. All participants are in listen-only mode, and there are two options to hear the webinar, by computer and by phone. If you look at the panel interface on your right, labeled audio, you can click either computer or phone to switch for the best option. At the conclusion of this webinar, we will be posting this session on YouTube and the DDA website. We ask that you give us at least 24 hours to get that posted. Questions can be typed in the question or chat box in the webinar panel, and the team will review and respond as appropriate. And now I'd like to introduce Marianne Mood and her Hilltop colleagues to begin today's training session. Good afternoon, Marianne.
Good afternoon, Robert. I am just going to give me a second. I had my template all pulled up and then I tried to make it so it would look better. So give me just a moment. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
And I'm still, I apologize. I tried to make this a little bit cleaner to show everybody, but I'm going to go ahead and roll with the instructions that are pulled up on the template or on my screen right now. So this is the instructions for the General Ledger template that were sent out to all the providers along with the General Ledger data collection template in the example as well. What I'm going to do is do an overview of the instructions, just so you can have a general idea of the instructions and what to expect throughout this presentation. Once I am finished going through the instructions, then we'll have other members of our team go ahead and go through the example template as well as the overview. We will be paying close attention to time in terms of if there are any questions. And please go ahead and put those questions in the chat, and then we will make sure that they are read and we will try to get all of them answered. So I'm going to start briefly by just going over the purpose of the General Ledger data collection template. And the idea has been so that all DDA providers can collect and submit General Ledger data to inform rates for DDA Medicaid services. So I do want to emphasize that this data collection template is focused on DDA Medicaid services. So only cost data will be collected on those DDA Medicaid funded services. The template is so that we can try to standardize the way data is collected across the system and on an annual basis, and it will be used to inform the rates. The template will allow for costs to be billed or for costs to be entered if you bill through PCIS2 or if you bill through LTSS Maryland. And if you happen to have during fiscal year 24 is the cycle that we want to collect data for. If you happen to be billing in both systems, the template does allow for that as well. So again, the data that we're planning on collecting is for fiscal year 24. So that means data, we're hoping you can start collecting the data on July 1st, 2023. And then details for how to submit the template will be sent out by DDA after the close of the fiscal year. So in terms of the instructions, Again, they were sent out with the data collection template. Certainly, if you do not have the instructions, please reach out to either DDA, and at the end of this presentation, you will see we have a particular email that you can also email the Health Talk Rate team. These instructions are also, this is a separate Word document, but there is also these same instructions included on the first tab of the data collection template. So if we move down a little, I'm looking at the DDA Medicaid data to be collected. The data is actually going to be collected at the cost category level, and providers may not necessarily be used to collecting data at that level, and that's why we wanted to make sure we got the template out early and that you could be looking at your systems in case there has to be any adjustments to your accounting system. So the different cost categories that we're looking at, there's 7 different cost categories: direct care staff or the direct service professional, employment-related expenses, program support, facility, transportation, training, and general and administrative. While all the cost categories are shown for each service tab, it is possible that you might not have expenses in those specific cost categories for a specific service. So in terms of the data points that we're looking to be collected, we're actually looking for the accounting code, a description of that code, and the expenses that are associated with that code. And the reason that we're asking for that description of that accounting code is because they might not be the same across all providers. As we collect data over the years, if there's a way for us to make that a little bit easier, if we start to see trends in the specific accounting codes and the descriptions, we will try to make that a little bit easier for providers to enter that data. We're also looking at the total number of service units. And so we're down here on the instructions. We're looking at the total number of service units for a specific service, and that's for each billing system. And then the total Medicaid payments received for each service, and again, for each billing system. And we're also collecting data by the different geographic areas, meaning either the rest of state or the geographic differential area, which includes Montgomery, PG, Calvert, Charles, and Frederick counties. There's also a section in the instructions in terms of cost allocation. And we do highly recommend, before you start filling out the template, to review the cost categories. Those are included in Appendix B of the instructions, and they're also included on the 3rd tab of the general ledger collection data collection template. So we are asking that all direct and indirect costs be included, and then for any type of shared cost, that the methodology that you're using, whether that be breaking it out by FTEs or billable units, wages or gross expenditures, that methodology be entered into the provider tab, which is the 2nd tab, so that we have an idea of what types of cost allocation and methodological ways that you're computing those. So I've gone through the cost allocation. We are up to completing the template. So over pages 2 and 3 is very specific instructions with respect to how to complete the template. Again, the first tab on your data collection template is the instructions. The 2nd tab is actually a provider information tab. On that tab includes obviously the provider information, as well as the name of the person who's filling out the template. And it also includes your provider identification numbers, your DDA provider number, but also your Medicaid number that you would typically be using for when you're billing. There are also spaces to put information about the number of direct support professionals, as well as the different levels. And we also ask a question about the number of full-time employees, because we are trying to also gather some information about staffing patterns. As we move down, there's some different color coding in terms of the different tabs are color coded based on the type of service category. And there is actually a crosswalk of the services and the service categories and what colors they are on the template to help guide providers. Any data that you actually have to enter is actually color gray so that you know that's what you're looking for. Also in the instructions are really specific information, is some additional specific information about questions or about definitions that you may have. Throughout the template, items that are asked for include unduplicated participant counts, or we may be, I know our focus is on residential services today, but if you also happen to be providing day habilitation services, for example, there are tabs in the template to provide that cost information by the specific group level. But if you're not able to provide that information by the group level, there's actually a tab where you could just put all of that information. And so those types of details are also provided in the instructions. This is the crosswalk, again, of the general service categories, and they are color coded so that you can find them a little bit easier in the template. And finally, towards the end of the instructions, there is a frequently asked questions that is listed, and then there's also technical assistance. This is our email address to reach out to the DDA rate team, or to the Hilltop rate team. I will make sure to tell you this DDA_rate at hilltop.umbc.edu, there is an underscore in that. And then the last item that I want to highlight is the different appendices that are included in the instructions. There's actually the general ledger data template attestation is included that will be submitted when you submit your data. There's the cost categories defined. There's a table included in the appendix as well as in the actual template. And then there is also a breakdown, an example breakdown of all of the cost categories. So that is actually all I have for just the overview of the instructions. And now I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Elizabeth Blake, and she's going to walk through an example of a sheet on the template.
Thank you, Marianne. Okay, so let me just share my screen real quick. Can everybody see the general ledger example template?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, perfect. So this document that I've pulled up is an Excel file that accompanies the instructions document that Marianne just went over. So the purpose of this Excel document here is to just give you an example of what a completed template may look like. Just as a small disclaimer before we dive in, the expenditures, hours, units, and accounting codes, these are all hypothetical, and they've been put into this example template after reading all of the templates that were submitted during our pilot work group. So your template may or may not look similar to this. However, the important aspects like the cost categories should be similar to what you all will enter into your own templates. So this first tab that we have here is just our instructions tab, and it's really similar to the document that Marianne just went over. So everything that is in this tab is going to be in your instructions Word document as well. So I'm not going to spend too much time going over everything here, but it is here for your reference while you're working on the template itself, and it goes through everything. So moving on to this provider information tab here. So this tab is where you're going to start entering some of the requested information that will be used to identify your organization, as well as some other key data points that Marianne touched on, and then I'll just touch on again. So first, we're going to ask for your provider organization information here. There's a spot for your organization name. Here we just have a fictional site called the Blue Finch. And then you'll have space to fill in your Medicaid number or numbers, as well as your DDA provider number. So we're also going to be asking for the information of the person who is completing the template, like Marianne said. And this is just going to be really helpful for us in the future for if we have questions about anything that's in your template, we'll be able to contact the person directly who completed it. So some additional information that we're going to be collecting includes the internal accounting system used for tracking, as well as the cost allocation method that your organization is using. And then we're going to ask you to provide us with the DDA billing systems used. In this case, in the example templates, we're using both LTSS and PCIS too. So the last two chunks of information that we ask for are going to be the number of DSP level 1, 2, and 3, as well as the information on staffing patterns for full-time employees, which is all right here. So the last thing that you're going to see on this provider information tab, it's going to be the summary of tabs completed. This has been shortened just to make it a little bit easier to read. The one in your actual general ledger template that you'll be completing is much longer, but these yes, no cells here are going to auto-populate. So as soon as you enter any type of information into one of the residential services tabs, meaningful days, support services, or wherever, that tab is going to auto-populate here, and it's going to say yes. So this is going to be really helpful for you when you're reviewing your tab to make sure that you've put everything in that you need to, and also helpful for us when we go back and look through your completed templates. So like Marianne said, in the instructions document, there was a cost categories description table. It's also going to be here in your tab, and this is super important because it's going to be really easy for you to be able to reference back to it while you're completing the template, but it should look familiar to you from the fiscal year 25 data collection tool. So it uses the same definitions and cost category items. But as always, I just want to preface this with these lists here with the items to include and exclude. They're not exhaustive. We tried to include as much detail as possible, but there may be things that come up as you start to complete your template that you might have questions about, and you can always send us an email at that email address that Marianne provided to you in that instructions document. So now we're going to move on to get into the stuff that we all really want to see, which is where we're actually going to be entering all of the information. So we have 3 tabs from your general ledger template that you all have received. We have one residential services tab, one meaningful day tab, and one support services tab. So starting with the residential services tab, the first thing that I want you to notice is that in this tab here particularly, it only has one billing system used, which is LTSS, because the service that we're looking at is the Community Living Enhanced Supports with Overnight Supervision. So we have all of the components of the brick going across. So we have our direct care staff, employment-related expenses, facility, program support, training, as well as transportation and general and administrative. And like Marianne said, we've kind of broke it up by rest of state and then the geographic differential. So you'll be able to fill in according to what you need to be able to do. So before we dive into this, I just want to reiterate what Marianne said. The accounting code description, the code description, is going to be really, really important, a lot more important than that actual accounting code, because you all are going to be using a variety of different accounting systems. So the accounting codes are not going to be standard across organizations, which is why we're asking for that code description. So now I'm just going to walk you through some of the accounting codes and descriptions that we have in this example template for the cost categories. And I'll just start off with our direct care staff. So at the blue bench, the expenditures related to our direct support professional wages are equal to about $1.8 million. So we have our accounting code here, description of the expense amount, and then the expense amount here. And then everything, if there was more than one thing, would sum in total here. So the direct care staff one is probably the most simple cost category, I believe. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that, but we are going to move on to our employment-related expenses. So here in this ERE cost category is where we want to make some really important distinctions. So this is the category where we want to include insurance such as FICA, unemployment, workers' comp, and medical. And we also want to include employee benefits, vacation, holiday, and other types of pay, such as the overtime portion of the wages. And we're also going to want to put any hiring expenses in here. So as you can see, for our hypothetical organization, we've entered all of the expenditures that we have related to employment related expenditures. We've put our accounting code, the code description, and then the expense amount. And then everything just gets totaled here at the bottom. So next we have our facility. And the facility cost category, this is where you're going to want to enter expenditures for the cost of actually running a facility where services are offered. So this includes things like rent or mortgage for the service facility, maintenance expenditures, insurance, taxes, interest on facility loans, utilities, depreciation on real property, as well as equipment costs. So for our example, we have property and casualty insurance listed, utilities for the service facility, building repairs and maintenance costs, as well as the depreciation on real property. So again, accounting code, code description, and then our expense amount, and it gets totaled here. So then the next one we have is our program support cost category. And this is where you're going to want to enter any costs required to provide services that are specific to the program. So in the program supports category, we're looking for things such as activity and supply costs, program support wages, cost of contracted services, medical supplies, and then IT expenses that are related to program support. So for our hypothetical site, we've entered our program support costs that include our program support wages, the cost of contracted services, medical supplies, as well as the cost for activities. So again, accounting code, code description, expense amount, everything's getting totaled there. So the next component that we have is going to be our training component here. So this cost category is going to include costs related to staff training, certifications, and things similar to staff development. So this would include the training staff hourly wages, third-party training costs, conferences, new hire training, and staff development. So for our organization, we have listed our DSP training wages, third-party training wages, as well as our general and administrative training wages here, and everything's getting totaled. So then we have the transportation component, which is going to include costs incurred by transportation staff, transportation time, and other transportation related costs. So what we have here is our vehicle insurance, fuel and fluid expenses, staff mileage reimbursement, repair and maintenance for the vehicle, and then the cost of tags and titles and registrations. And then we've also included the depreciation on the vehicles. And again, everything just gets totaled here. So you're not going to have to total anything, it'll auto-populate. So then we have this subtotal here just to mirror the brick. We have everything totaling across what you have entered so far. And then the last place that you're going to need to enter specific accounting codes and code descriptions is for our general and administrative portion. So this is going to include costs that would be common to all businesses. So these are things like your administrative salaries, office, rent, utilities, and supplies, as well as the management and executive salaries, general insurance, advertising, and things of the like. So our organization has office supplies, advertising, legal and accounting expenses, as well as the utilities and the phone and internet cost for the office, and everything gets totaled there. And then right here is going to be your subtotal of all of those costs that have been entered. Okay, so then the last thing that we are going to ask you to provide in this portion of the tab or in the template is we want to know the total base units for the billing system. In this case, we have the LTSS, as well as any add-on or dedicated units. So then we're going to ask you to indicate the total LTSS or PCIS 2 payments that are made. So this is going to be consistent for the geographic differential or the rest of state. So you don't have to worry about entering any repeat information. Everything that you enter is going to be automatically totaled here at the bottom, as well as down here for us to see. So the last thing that I want to show you on this residential services tab is we just have some information here that we're asking you to provide. And in this case, it just happens to be group homes. So we're asking for the number of sites, and the number of unduplicated participants served annually. So this information and all of the tabs in your general ledger collection template, there's going to be a table at the bottom in the beginning of the template. However, it's going to vary depending on what service we're looking at. So each of the services has a unique set of data points that we would like to collect. So just make sure to remember to kind of scroll down and see if you can fill in the tables that are here at the bottom. So this is what a completed tab may look like for your organization. Like I said, I'm just going to quickly go through a meaningful day one and then a support services one as well. But since we're focusing on residential services today, this is where we were going to spend the majority of our time. So just moving on to a meaningful day services tab. But one thing that I want you to note is that the accounting codes, they're just going to be very consistent across the across each of the tabs, and the code descriptions can also be the same. So we have here all of the components that we talked through. So we have our direct support, professionals here, direct care staff, employment related expenses, your facility expenditures, program support, training, transportation, as well as the general and administrative. And what I want you to notice here is that because the service can be billed in both PCIS 2 as well as LTSS Maryland, we have gone ahead and put a column for each. So if you have expense amounts in PCIS 2, you'd put the expense amount here and then just leave the LTSS blank. Or if you were billing in both systems, you can put each of their respective costs there, and then everything will be totaled up just like it was on the last tab, except for we have a little bit more information that we're totaling here. So just like with the other tab, what we're going to be looking for as well is we're going to want to know your total base units as well as the total dedicated units or add-on units, and then of course the total payments for each of the billing systems that are used. And that's going to be consistent for the rest of state and the geographic differential. And then, like I said, very, very similar across tabs. The only thing that's going to be different for the most part is going to be the information that we're asking you to provide at the bottom of the front of the tab. So we have these tables here. You'll enter their any data wherever we have a gray cell for you. And the same thing here, set up the exact same, just with a different table at the bottom. So that is everything that I wanted to cover with you all today. And I think now is a great time for us to start answering questions. So I'll go ahead and kick it back to Robert to go ahead and reshare the screen. But yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth, for that. We do have a few questions. Again, if you have questions, please use the questions tab that's in the panel. I believe it would be on the right side of the screen towards the bottom. The first one is related to audited financial statements. Our year-end audit will not be completed until October or November. Should we wait for our final audit or put in draft amounts? So I can go ahead and answer that. So we're not requiring that this information comes from audited financial statements. Instead, we'll be asking providers just to sign an attestation that basically states that the information is accurate to the best of their knowledge, and that's it. Second question, will the general ledger data tool replace the cost report? If you are still billing in PCIS 2, the cost report will still be required. Obviously, if you're billing in LTSS for all of your services, then there would be no cost report. We did have conversations internally with other departments to see if we could use this as a replacement for the cost report, and it just wasn't feasible based on the information that's collected in the cost report for providers who are billing in PCIS 2. Okay, question for the Hilltop team. Are there specific rules for administrative allocations.
Thanks, Robert. I can go ahead and take this one. In terms of your allocation processes, as Marianne noted in the instructions, you can use the allocation processes that you use when you're submitting your audited financials, and we're asking you to just share how that is done in the template so we can collect that information when we get your data back.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, is overtime for DSP wages pulled from base wages and reported separately? If yes, then the wages we report should not have overtime in the total. Is that correct?
So the base of the overtime should be included in the DSP wages, and then the overtime portion of the overtime wage should be included in employment-related expenses.
Great. Are there any other questions? We still have 29 minutes. We have time to answer any questions you may have. Okay. Okay, question, is the form required to be submitted, and is there a deadline? The form, the GL data collection tool is required to be submitted. Hilltop, you refresh my memory if there was a deadline attached to that.
Sure. Thanks, Robert. The tool will be collecting data for all of fiscal year 24. And so we won't be asking for that to be submitted back to us until September of 2024. So our goal was to get it out to everyone, to give some time to review and be prepared to collect the data in a way that you can report it back on the template. And then we will be available to answer questions, and then we'll reach out and give you directions on how to submit that back to us following the end of the fiscal year.
Great, thank you. And then someone is requesting that you repeat the answer related to the overtime question.
Sure. So for overtime wages for direct care staff, you would put the wage for the direct care staff in the direct care staff category, and then the overtime portion of that wage would be collected in the employment related expenses. So if you have a direct care staff who's providing overtime, you're actually going to allocate the overtime piece of that into employment related expenses, so that overtime is captured in two different cost categories.
Thank you for that. The template has separate tabs for CLGH and CLGH dedicated hours. Can we use an allocation to determine staff wages, or are providers expected to adjust internal processes to report on this?
That's a great question. So we are hopeful to get the data at this very specific level. And so if you have the ability to report that, that's wonderful. If you're going to do a cost allocation in terms of how you're dividing those wages up, if you can just include that information in your template, that would be really helpful.
Great, thank you. So there's a few comments related to the DayHab collection tool versus the general ledger collection tool as it relates to the guidance given around overtime. So I would just, remind everyone that the data collection tool that is due tomorrow is a different tool and has a different purpose and was also put together by a different group of people. So it is possible the guidance that they gave during the training for that tool is different from what you're hearing today. So you should follow the guidance respective to each tool.
Yes, and Robert, I will kind of jump in and say we had tried to be as consistent as possible in terms of the cost categories defined in the different items in each of the cost categories. If there is a specific question, providers can certainly reach out to the Hilltop email address and we'd be happy to respond and help.
Great. Do the employee-related expenses for G&A wages go in ERE or G&A?
So wages for G&A should go in G&A. And the employment-related expenses go in terms of benefits and vacation and insurance should be included in the employment-related expenses.
Okay. Can you review the expense categories definitions a bit more to include what is excluded?
Sure. Elizabeth, do you want to go ahead and share the example template again? And we can walk through the cost categories defined tab.
Yes. Let me share my screen. Let me know when you can see the example template.
We can see it, thanks.
Okay, perfect. So here's the cost category descriptions tab. Okay, so on this side, we have our cost category. Here, the additional information, which is just our definition of what the cost category is. So we have our items to include, which we've been over, and then here are our items to exclude. So like we were saying, with the administrative related administrative salaries are going to be classified as general and administrative, so they'll go in that cost category. And the direct care staff, you won't be including any wages or salaries for essential staff that are not directly providing a service. Even if these staff are still interacting with clients, if they're not directly providing a service, they don't go here. We're also going to include the share of time spent or exclude in this wages and salary, the estimate share of time spent providing services for mixed roles. And then also exclude costs incurred by staff while not providing services, so the drive time, which would be considered under our transportation cost category. We're also going to exclude fringe benefits, which are classified as our employment-related expenses. Bonuses, vacation, holiday, and other pay, and overtime are all going to be excluded from this portion, and they're going to be in the employment-related expenses, which we have them listed in the items to include. So for items to exclude here, we have our salaries and wages, which are going to be in either the direct care staff, program support, or general and administrative, depending on whose wages and salaries that we're talking about. We're also going to exclude the transportation costs because these are going to be in our transportation costs category. And then we're going to exclude training costs, which will be under our training category. So then here we have our program support, which are the costs required to provide the services specific to the program. So under here, we want to exclude our salaries and hourly wages for our direct care staff, as well as the administrative staff. We've been over where those go in terms of their cost category. So for facility, one of the important distinctions to make is that we're not going to include any of the office costs under our facility costs. These facility costs are going to be just for running a facility where services are actually offered. So things to exclude here would be the rent, mortgage, maintenance, insurance, taxes, and utilities for the office, because that's going to be under general and administrative. So for transportation, we have everything. We've kind of been over what needs to be included, but things to exclude here to make sure that you don't confuse with it. No salaries or hourly wage for direct care staff. If they are providing a service during transportation, these would be considered just direct care staff costs. And then we also want to exclude the staff costs for a commute to work or off the clock time. So then we have our training, and training I think is pretty, we didn't list anything to exclude because anything that is going to be related with training is going to be included in our training cost category here. So then general and administrative is the last one that we talk about, and these are just the expenses that are common to all businesses. So things that we want to make sure that we're excluding from this category are going to be costs related to specific services offered, as well as any costs that are associated with that service facility. So we don't want to include the rent, mortgage, or utilities that are relating to our service facility. We're only going to be including things for our office. So if there's any more questions on that, hopefully I can help answer them. And then as time goes on, as we get more people filling out this template and we see things that people are putting in different categories, we will hopefully be able to make this list a little bit more exhaustive.
Great, thank you. So another great question. Is completion of the tool mandatory? What I can tell you is that it is our intent that this tool will become mandatory and take the place of the cost reports that are unique to PCIS 2. So, this tool will be unique to Billings and LTSS Maryland. However, initially out the gate, we are not saying it's mandatory, but we highly encourage everyone to fill out the tool and make sure that they're able to get any of their technical issues addressed so that when it does become mandatory, you're ahead of the game. And here's a question for Hilltop. On the provider information tab, we have to indicate the number of DSPs at each level. That number will change throughout the year as people complete more training. Do we report the number at the end of the year or an average throughout the year, or is there some other date or method of measurement?
That's a great question. And what we'll ask is that providers complete it as of the end of the fiscal year. So in counting each DSP once at their category at the end of the year.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question for Hilltop team. We pay premiums to DSPs working in certain houses, not all houses. This premium is an add-on to the DSP's pay rate when working at certain houses. Is the premium cost shown with employment-related expenses or the direct care staff category?
So the premium should be included in the ERE, employment-related expenses.
Great, thank you. And there's a comment related to the answer that was given to the question related to overtime. And the question is whether or not the overtime gets allocated twice with that methodology?
The overtime should only be allocated once in its entirety. The base wage goes in the DSP wages, and the overtime piece paid for that overtime goes in the ERE. So essentially, if a person is working overtime, it's split.
Okay, great. What would be your recommendation for the best way to allocate a DSP salary for training time and program services when it could be different for each DSP?
That's a really great question. It might take a little more technical assistance in getting information from the provider. So that's something that we'd be happy to take offline and have a conversation with. And if there's any follow-up information, we'd be happy to share it with the larger provider network.
Thank you. And then just a question seeking clarity. Will the administrative benefits, they want to validate that the administrative benefits would be included in employment related expenses as opposed to G&A?
Okay, yes, apologies. The benefits would go in ERE.
Great, thank you. And another question related to overtime, again, seeking some clarity. Just want to be clear on the overtime. If paid time and a half, are we saying that only the half is recorded as ERE?
Yes. So it's the overtime portion of the wage only that is reported as ERE.
Okay. We do not track DSP time for costs incurred by staff while not providing day hab services. For example, drive time, which is transportation. Are we required to start asking staff to track this time? And I can actually reach out to this individual just to get some more information to make sure that I understand the question as well. So I'll reach out to you offline.
Okay, thanks, Robert, and we're happy to help if you get more information.
Another question for residential providers, can the facility costs of the residential sites be included? For example, house rent, etc.
Yes, this is a really great question because we do know that CMS does not allow those costs to be included in the rate setting process. But it would be really helpful if providers can share that cost so we have that information.
Another question, has the template been distributed to providers? Yes, we did send the template out to providers using the email list that we had. So if you did not receive it, please send us an email using the RRAG email address that I put into the chat, and we'll make sure we get that over to you ASAP. Question for Hilltop. How are vacation payouts handled? For example, an employee chooses a payout instead of taking vacation.
So that should be included in ERE, similar as you would actually pay for the vacation.
Thank you. Okay, we're at the end of the questions. We still have a few more minutes left for last minute questions. While we're waiting for those questions, I just want to remind folks that we'll be doing another training session on the general ledger data collection tool. The next session is on Monday, June 12th from 10 to 11 a.m. And the focus of that training session will be on support services. Support services also includes personal supports. I know that's one of our more utilized services. So if you're a provider of personal supports, you will want to attend that session on Monday. And then next Wednesday, June 14th, from 11 to noon, we'll be providing a training that's focused on meaningful day services. So to save the dates. Here's a question related today. What if day program is held in the same building as one's offices? Can you then allocate the rent, utilities, etc. for program services?
Yeah, so you would want to allocate the portion of the facility that's used for the G&A or office, and then the piece that's used for the day services.
Yes. The time again for the training that is scheduled for Monday, June 12th is from 10 a.m. until 11 a.m. Yes, someone's asking to be reminded of where these recorded sessions will be. So we will be posting these recorded sessions on the DDA website under the RRAG resources, and I will put that hyperlink into the chat. Okay, I put the hyperlink in the chat. By the end of day tomorrow, you'll be able to click on this link and you should, it should, it'll be under resources, which is sort of in the middle of the page where you see the tiles, but you'll see the tile that is specific to these trainings there on that page. Okay, I want to again thank everyone for spending an hour of your day with us to learn more about the General Ledger collection tool and how to, populate that tool. And please do let us know if you have any questions using the email address provided by Hilltop and or sending an email to us directly using the RRAG email address, and we'll ensure that we get that over to Hilltop for follow-up. And we look forward to seeing you again on Monday. Thanks, everyone.